Hello and welcome to my cake kitchen. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how I made my first 3D standing minion cake, which I'm going to be referring to as Emma throughout this tutorial. Emma is a cute sassy minion made for a purchasing customer. However, this wasn't the cake the customer ordered. The customer ordered a minion based on one I had previously made, and whilst in the middle of making that minion cake, I fancied a challenge and changed the idea of a sitting minion cake to a 3D standing minion. And as always, there were challenges along the way. So in this video I'm going to be taking you through the entire process, packed with tips to help you make your first character cake if you wish to undertake such a challenge. On my work table is a 7-inch 6-layered cake filled with buttercream and wrapped in cling film. The cake had been left to chill before work starts. I did this to ensure the cake was set steady for easy carving. For in-depth tutorials on how to fill and stack a cake, I have linked a few videos in the description box for your convenience. Carving starts by first trimming away the brown crusts of the cake, and the round cake will slowly take the form of a cylinder. When carving a cake, a good tip is to work slowly, cutting away a little piece at a time. This allows room for mistakes to be corrected without drastic consequences. For me though, whilst this is my first attempt at a standing minion cake, my first minion cake didn't look anything like what I would eventually polish my skills to achieve. There's a photo on screen of my first minion cake, and I'm interested to know what you think. Our cake is carved into shape and it's time to crumb coat using ganache. Buttercream can be used here, but for my cakes I prefer ganache to buttercream, which is a whole subject matter that can be discussed later. However, crumb coating this cake helps to seal in all the crumbs made from trimming and carving. For this cake, crumb coating also serves to even out the cake surface for a more polished look. For the task, a flexi smoother is helpful for scraping around the curves, and the process here is all about adding and smoothing out the ganache, aiming for a polished look. Worth noting, at this stage the cake was carved as a sitting minion and the intention for a standing minion hadn't set in. And if you wonder why the sudden upgrade later, the customer was just super nice. I love minions and fancied a challenge. On the subject of nice customers, you'll be surprised how much value you can bag yourself by simply being polite and courteous, and I share some of my experiences of the not so nice customers in some of my short videos. So if you're curious to know more, you can check those out. The cake after crumb coating was supposed to be chilled, but this was the moment I changed my mind to make the cake a standing minion, and the clue is in the process. Had I intended to make a standing minion, the cake would have been set on a structure first, but as it appears, I am measuring a threaded rod against the cake so I can cut this to make a structure. Talking about cake structures, I built one for my first 3-tier gravity defying cake, which I made into a tutorial for you to check out. This is linked in the description box for you. With the threaded rod measured, it is marked with a blade, and at this point I enlist some help to cut the threaded rod as I need all my fingers intact. What I'm doing here is against all safety protocols, but if you're unsure about handling tools, then this may not be the cake for you. I however encourage you to try this out. This isn't as scary as you think, because I remember the anxiety I felt making my first 3-tier gravity defying cake. Once I was done, I felt rather confident to undertake making Emma. Another clue to the sudden change of mind is this board. If you've been on this channel before, you'll find I get my cakes displayed on a fondant covered board once they are done. So I covered the board first, and Emma would have been sitting on this board once she was covered in a layer of yellow fondant, and the decorations would have continued from here. But as you can see, I am having to drill a hole through the fondant covered board now so I can get the structure built. There are more tips on screen about how to get a steady 3D structure for your cakes, and I have links in the description box showing you how to build a solid structure. After drilling a hole in the board, I have applied polystyrene cubes as feet to raise the board. The feet has to be set fixed to the board before we continue to the next stage. The feet are fixed to the board and a rod is set into the drilled hole. A washer is attached to the bottom, and this is followed by a nut which is screwed into place. On the board surface, a washer is again placed and a nut follows. A spanner is then employed to tighten the nut and washers in place. This is done to ensure the rod is fixed and steady in place, as an unsteady structure will cause the cake to be shaky. Once done, a nut is again set on the threaded rod over which a foil cake card is placed. To make the cake card strong and steady, it is attached to a foam board and sealed together using hot glue. I'm using a cake board here as the base of the structure because this cake is not heavy, but for heavier cakes you might want to consider pre-cut MDF boards from cake supply stores locally or online. For pre-cut threaded rods, check your local hardware and DIY stores like Screwfix and B&Q here in the UK, and the details of what you need are on screen for you. My sudden change of plan meant I hadn't planned properly for how this was going to affect filming, so please bear with me if things don't seem straightforward. However, a quick explanation for how I got the structure together. So the rod was cut about 13 inches long, but an inch has been absorbed into the cake board held in place by the nuts and washers. The cake is 10 inches in height, hence the cake foil card it's set on the rod to measure 10 inches from the card upwards, leaving 2 inches below the card and the board surface to serve as Emma's leg. I hope this kind of makes some sense to you, and more than anything I hope you find some value in this video and some of the many tutorials on this channel. And if you do, please do consider subscribing and leave any suggestions for what you would like to see next, and I'll do well to consider that. And whilst at it, hit the notification bell to be notified about future videos such as these and more. The entire structure is sealed off using foil tape and the board is covered with cling film before the cake is transferred onto the structure. Ganache is now applied to fill and polish this part of the cake, and we are done here and we're off to the next. The cake was left to chill for the ganache to set and is returned for Trex to be rubbed on the surface ready for fondant covering. Trex is also known as Crisco, which is a brand of shortening used in baking or cooking, but on the cake it serves as glue to hold the fondant when it's applied to the cake. I prefer using Trex rather than anything else because I'm able to correct mistakes by taking out the fondant completely if necessary without the fondant color bleeding or the fondant itself getting sticky. I had already colored yellow fondant and rolled out this before covering over the cake. I know the use of fondant can be a tricky subject on the internet, but whatever opinions are on the use of fondant, customer preference and choice ultimately matters above all. With that in mind, good quality fondant will make the covering process easy and tastes great too. And for this cake, I used a kilogram of Massaticino Tropic mixed into 250 grams of Tesco own brand. Now this is more than I needed, but for coloring fondant, I prefer to have more than I need, just so that I have some surplus just in case I run short. The yellow fondant covering is complete and polishing was done with a roll of fondant wrapped in cling film. This is able to smooth out the fondant for a polished look. However, it's worth noting a polished cake is the results of the work undertaken before then, so crumb coating and ganaching the cake better yields an even cake surface for a polished fondant covering. With the yellow done, the blue bottoms are attached to and a fondant tool used to create the lines of the seam. I couldn't find my stitching tool then, so another tool was used to mimic the stitches on Emma's bottoms. This is where the use of Trex is an advantage because I'm able to polish out any excess Trex with a brush easily, which would have been difficult to do with water. I recognize my experience of having made minions in the past means I'm able to complete much of Emma's clothing freehand, but a few tips to help you through this part is to create a pattern on a paper, measure and cut that out before attaching to the minion, and don't be afraid to fail. When I made my first minion cake I was nervous, but as the years developed and my skills improved, so did my confidence to try new challenges. On this channel though, I'm going to be undertaking some new challenges of different types of cakes that are out of my comfort zone, and I'll be bringing you along the journey with me. But if you'd like to see a cake that really stretched me beyond my limits, you might want to check my last video, which is linked below for you. That was a mammoth task. Emma's short legs and shoes were molded freehand too, and everything done here on was more like my imagination to bring Emma to life. There isn't exactly a right way or wrong way of doing this, so I kept going even when I was unsure until I achieved the results I was imagining. I also had a photo of my previous minion cake for reference, but failing that, a stock image will be of great assistance. I find usually having a visual of the element or character helps when creating a character cake, because you only have to get a slight thing wrong and it changes the entire character of the cake. I made a green dragon cake once, and when my son woke up to see it, he was like, "Mama, is that a frog?" Well, that was the day I began to question my skills as a cake decorator. I believe I have made great improvements since, and I might just go back and ask him what he thinks. Back on the subject of cakes, the slight imperfections on Emma's blue bottoms form part of the character of Emma as a cake. The details on the bottoms were sculpted to show folds and creases on her clothing, which I really liked. There's always room with character cakes for details to be enhanced slightly as an artistic expression, which I went for on this cake. So I wanted her shoes to look a certain way, and on the back of the bottoms I even added a pocket to enhance the cute character nature I was aiming for. During my research for this minion cake, I found that minions were non-binary, which was a slightly confusing discovery for me, and their two eyes were each different. Emma is gradually coming along, which I am excited about. I stayed up all night to make this cake, which wouldn't have been the case had I just stuck to a sitting minion cake. Some of the challenges I faced also came from filming. I wasn't focused on the camera placement much when filming this, so my angles were slightly off. I had 2 work tables and 1 camera, which made it difficult to move the camera around for tasks such as rolling the fondant out. Whilst editing, I also realized that even when I was working in front of the camera rolling small pieces of elements from fondant, I unknowingly raised my hands out of frame, which meant some of the processes weren't caught on camera for you to see. However, between camera angles, tiredness and general challenges of cake decorating, Emma was a joy to create, and we still aren't done yet. Moving on to some of the more defining features of Emma, it's time to make the goggles. First, I rolled out some grey fondant and cut out a large fondant circle using a circle cutter. Then I cut out the inside of the larger circle with a small cutter. This detail will come together shortly, but I'm creating the ridges on the goggles by attaching small pieces of grey fondant before moving on to the eyes. With the eyes, I start with rolling out a white piece of fondant before cutting out 2 round circles. These are the same size and thickness as the hollow part of the inside of the goggle. For the other parts of the eyes, like the iris, I mixed brown color into white fondant and added some black to make a marble, from which I made 2 small circles. These elements were all set to dry first before being put together, which you will see shortly, but a quick way to achieve this is to add some Tylose powder or CMC to your fondant to create gum paste before modeling. Once done, set the pieces in an oven at 50 degrees C for 20 minutes to half an hour. Bring out and leave to cool before use. You could dry elements slightly just as you want them, or make them solid by how much you adjust the heat and how long you leave them to dry in the oven. The goggles were painted with luster dust mixed with rejuvenated fluid. Painting was carefully done to avoid smudges of luster on the cake, after which the strap was attached and stitching details added to enhance the look of the goggles. For the hair, I rolled some black fondant to make a snake shape and twisted it slightly to give it details which looked rather squiggly. The straps of Emma's overalls are added, and the arms were made from logs of yellow fondant with fingers added in black fondant. But did you know a minion has only 3 fingers? I didn't know that before, and it was fun to discover new things on my research for this cake. Leave any minion fun facts in the comment section if you know anything else. There's a bit more details to personalize the overalls, and I'm adding some gold pearls and flowers to the front pocket, but those were just my ideas to get Emma looking cute, because once again, I love minions, and I have a special idea of what my own minion would look like if I were to create one for myself. Moving on, a ribbon was attached to the trim of the cake board, and my trusty steamer was brought out to polish the cake by using steam to clean any residue on the cake surface. This also works for when there is cornstarch residue or any excesses from the cake decorating process. Well, Emma is all complete, and here she stands in all her glam and cuteness. For me though, the process was rather anxiety-inducing yet satisfying to complete, and I hope you gained some value. I'll see you in my next video. Thanks for watching.